on the program, we have Major General Patton from Colorado Springs, who flew the U-2 and the SR-71. We were supposed to have Kirk Brown, a native of Hudson, Wisconsin, who is currently flying the T-60 that just made all the loud noise. So he made his presence known for us. My name is Don Patton. I'm co-founder of the World War II History Roundtable. We meet out at Fort Snelling. I do have copies of our 28th year schedule, or you can stop by our booth. We've got schedules for the upcoming year, and also books from our previous programs on various topics. There's Pat now, or Kurt now, buzzing. Okay, our speaker is Pat Halloran. Pat grew up in Minnesota. He has a older brother who had an article in Minnesota Monthly here recently, and he was a combat photographer. So it's a family of some military significance. Pat, can you tell us a little bit about your early tell us about your early childhood and what got you into aviation.
Yeah, one thing I learned a long time ago is never try to give a speech when there's a flyby going on. It doesn't work too well. Yeah, I was born down in Chatfield, Minnesota, just outside of Rochester. I was born on a farm and lived down there until I finished high school. And then I came up to Minneapolis, and I was a music major in the Conservatory of Music up at the McPhail Conservatory of Music, which is now part of the university music department. I had no intention of ever flying airplanes. I'd never been in an airplane. And part of the thing from my mind was that until I took a break from school one summer to make some money so I could come back and continue to school. And when I took a break from school, the draft was still in effect. And when you leave school, or when you're in school, you're exempt. When you leave school, somehow they find out. So my mother gave me a call and said, you just got your draft notice. And she recognized that because both of my older brothers had been drafted in World War II, and my sister was married to a military person, so our whole family was military. So she recognized that draft notice and let me know about it, and I thought, you know, I think I'll go down to a recruiter. I'm going down to the recruiting office. I was playing in a dance band out in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm going to go to a recruiter and volunteer. Maybe I'll go in the Army, because I understand you can stay in the Army for 18 months and get the GI Bill. I said I should have done that right out of high school, because we didn't have any money to pay for college. And so that was my plan. So I went to a recruiter, and I was waiting. The Army guy was busy, and I'm just sitting there in a chair reading a magazine. And I looked over across the room, and there was an Air Force recruiting guy, a sergeant over there. And he had the brand new Air Force blue uniform. So the Air Force had just become a service shortly before that. And they always wore the Army clothes, and now we had our own uniform that was blue. And I thought, boy, that's a hell of a good-looking uniform. And he saw me looking at him, and he kind of gave me the finger. He said, come over here for a minute. Let me chat while you're waiting for your Army guy. And 30 minutes later, I had signed on the dotted line to go in the Air Force, and I spent 34 years in it with absolutely no intention of ever flying an airplane or being in the Air Force. But once you get involved in aviation, it's pretty hard to turn around. And that's how I transitioned from a farm boy to a member of the United States Air Force, where I went through aviation cadet programs, and that was a nice program because they were getting ready for the Korean War, and they needed to pump up the service, get more pilots. So my timing really worked out perfect. And that after 13 months, I was a second lieutenant and had a set of wings. So it was a quick, easy way to get into service, and I just enjoyed the hell out of it. I never had any doubts about being in the service versus continuing my career in music. I wasn't that good anyway, so. Hey Dave, just spotted you.
Where did you do your various training, basic and advanced?
Yeah, when I first went into service, we did our AFHS-MN program down in Texas. And the base is no longer down there in Sherman, Texas. And the first airplane we flew was the T-6, which is buzzing around here now. You know, that's a pretty big airplane when you look back at it. And I'd never been in an airplane in my life, so not knowing any better, I just assumed, well, this is the way you learn how to fly. You get in this big airplane and learn how to do it. Because prior to that, they always had lead-in airplanes, you know, Stearmans or half a dozen different smaller airplanes, and then the T-6 was considered the advanced trainer, your last trainer before you went in operational. So we started out with T-6, and you know, it worked out okay, obviously, because we didn't need all that advanced training in lesser airplanes, so it kept it pretty simple. And that training in the T-6 lasted about 7 months, as I recall, 7 or 8 months. And then you had a choice. You had 2 fields to go to. You either went to fighters, you either went to fighter training or you went to bomber training. The guys that went to bombers through the B-25, there was just one training base up in Oklahoma. And those of us who went to fighters, we were going to be jet pilots. The jets were brand new in the service, and so everybody wanted to be a jet pilot. And we went out to Phoenix, Arizona, Williams Air Force Base, and that's where we did our jet training.
Did you ever fly T-28s after the T-6?
No, never flew anything else from the training standpoint. I would love to have flown the T-28. It's a nice airplane, and I never got a chance to get in it.
We have a few T-28s that do come in, but again, if you go out on the flight line, you'll see a lot of the T-6s, and that's what's currently flying over us. So you went into jets, P-80s, I guess, or F-80s?
Yeah, we had the T-33 was the initial airplane, the two-place, which is really an F-80 with an added cockpit, same basic machine, engines and everything, but so I think we had 3 rides in a T-33. That was our first experience to be in a jet. And then they had F-80s, a single seat F-80, and so that was our training airplane for solo flying and all of the instrument work and formation and acrobatics, those sorts of things that you'll get as you go through training system. We all did that in the F-80. I like the F-80. I adapted to it very quickly. It's a small airplane. Cockpit was tiny, and I'm a little guy. I just felt very comfortable inside that airplane. And of course, just the fact that we were going to be jet pilots, that was a big deal in those days.
Did you end up getting into Korea?
Yeah, after I graduated from training, I was assigned to a fighter outfit in Georgia, and we were flying the F-84 Thunderjet. In those days, the 2 primary fighters in the Air Force were the F-86 and the F-84, kind of like the F-15 and F-16 have been in recent years for the Air Force. And the 84 was basically air-to-ground work. We did dive bombing and machine gunning and napalm. It was kind of a carryover from World War II. We could get involved in air-to-air fights with MiGs and such, but our primary mission was take care of the troops on the ground and do interdiction work. And so that's how we trained when I was stationed in Georgia. We had ranges that we could go to and fly and do some air-to-air work and then a lot of air-to-ground. And so after I'd been there about a year, the Korean War had already started. It started about the same time as that I graduated. So I spent about a year in this one unit. And then they wanted some replacement pilots for Korea, so they pulled about 20 of us, all brand new second lieutenants, and said it's time to get a little baptism of fire. So we all went to Korea, and again we still flew the F-84 because that was one of the primary fighter bombers in the Korean War.
After the Korean War, what did you transition into?
Well, I flew 100 combat missions over North Korea during the war. That was the normal tour, 100 missions. And then when I came back, I was again reassigned to another F-84 squadron. This was up in Maine. I'd never been to the East Coast before, so going up to Maine was an interesting experience. With my first chance to eat a lobster. And that unit then transferred down to Oklahoma City. So I spent a total of about 7 years flying the F-84. And about that time, the Korean War was over, and all the Air Force was doing was just doing training and training and training. And that really gets kind of boring after a while, even though you're flying nice airplanes, doing interesting stuff. And we got wind of there's going to be a new top secret program in the Air Force, and it was very hush-hush, and you never read anything about it in public, but the rumor mill was running wild. And so it turns out that the various wing commanders of these fighter outfits were contacted and said, check around your unit and see if you can get about half a dozen guys that you think would adapt to what this program is, and follow up for an interview and see if they'd like to volunteer for this top secret program. But you can't tell them very much about it. Even the commander didn't know too much about it. But so I was interviewed by the commander, and he said, I think you'd like this new program that you probably heard some rumors about. And I said, yeah, I'm kind of bored of what we're doing here. I said, what is it? He said, well, I can't tell you. He said, but it's going to be a jet airplane. It's going to be a single engine. And I said, that's good, because fighter pilots like single engine. And it's just one guy, single place airplane. I said, that's good, that's what we all like. And he said, you're going to fly a very different kind of a mission. It's going to be extremely high altitude to the point that you're going to have to wear spacesuits. And I thought, hot damn, I'm going to be an astronaut. And so I reported, it turned out it was the U-2 program. So I reported down to the training base at Del Rio, Texas. They wanted to hide the airplane from the public view, and they did a great selection. No one's ever been to Del Rio, Texas. So we had the training base down there, and that's the first time I had seen the airplane. And you know, the U-2 is kind of a jet-powered glider with these huge 80-foot wingspan. But it was a single engine and one pilot, so that part was okay. But it was a totally different mission than being a fighter pilot, I can assure you.
Say, let me ask you a stupid question. Nobody's been to Del Rio. This is a top secret aircraft. I've been to Del Rio, and it's right on the Rio Grande, right across from Mexico. And I would think Mexico would be a prime spot for, at that time, Cold War spies to be looking across and seeing what was flying in at Laughlin Air Force Base.
Yeah, they probably did. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised because, of course, the Ciudad de Cuba, the city across, it's a very small little Mexican town, and it's 200 miles from the next closest town, so it's not like there's a thriving community there with a lot of opportunities to people to come in and not be recognized. But that being as it is, it would have been totally vulnerable to that sort of observation. But we had to train someplace, and so they thought that'd be as good as any.
Well, we hear about this infamous place called Area 51. Did you ever do any, I know that's where the U-2 was tested, but did you ever do any flying out of there after you finished at Del Rio?
No, I've been into Area 51, but I didn't do any training up there. That was used primarily for the CIA program. They built Area 51 for the U-2. There was nothing there but a desert lake bed. And when the U-2 was built, they wanted someplace to train completely out of sight. And the CIA got the first block of airplanes, so that's where they were going to do their training. So after they finished their training, then we sent about 6 or 7 pilots up there, and they took a quick ground course, and then they picked up the airplanes and flew them down to Del Rio. And so that's how we got our first airplanes. But none of us really trained up there. We did all of the training in Texas. They kept the CIA program and the Air Force program separate.
Could you explain that a little bit? What was the difference of their missions?
Well, the CIA program and the whole U-2 project was designed to overfly the Soviet Union because the administration was very concerned about what was going on in the Soviet Union. Premier Khrushchev was making all sorts of noises at the United Nations and everything about how he was going to sink the United States. He said that we're cranking missiles out of our factories like sausages, and he was very, very threatening and very overt about it. And we didn't know what the hell was going on in the Soviet Union. We didn't have any spy network, didn't have satellites, of course.
Well, what year did you go into the U-2?
Well, I went into it, I checked out in 1957, and the CIA part of the program actually started the year before. We were 1 year behind the CIA project. And so the guys that went into the CIA program, we all came out of the same squadrons. Every CIA, or every U-2 pilot, whichever program he was in, was a former F-84 fighter pilot. They picked 100% of the crew force from flying F-84s. And so we knew a lot of the guys that suddenly disappeared out of our squadrons, didn't know where they went. And it turns out they went to the CIA side. And you had to be a reserve officer. If you had a regular commission, you wouldn't be selected for the CIA because they technically discharged them from the Air Force. And that gets a little complicated if you're a regular officer. But the reserves, you know, they can come and go all the time. So you had to be a reserve officer. And so some, I don't know, 25 or 30 guys left our squadrons from all around the United States and wound up in the CIA. It was the same thing in the Air Force side. We had guys coming from different units, people we didn't even know. But we did know that we all had the same background, same F-84 experience. And so that was how the distinction came about between the two programs, because they were designed and put together to do the overflying of the Soviet Union. The Air Force was not allowed to do that. President Eisenhower said, no, we can't have guys in uniform overflying the Soviet Union. That's an act of war. But if these crazy civilians, out of control, if they want to overfly the Soviet Union, if the CIA guys want to overfly the Soviet Union, we can disown them if they get caught. And that's the way the program was set up. And those guys were all hired by the CIA. And so technically they were civilians. And you know, everybody knows the CIA does sneaky stuff all the time, so it wouldn't have been a surprise, you know, that the CIA civilians were doing the overflights. Now we overflew everybody except Russia and the Soviet Union. But we weren't worried about the countries we were overflying. There was tons of stuff going on that we participated in. Of course, we did overflights over Cuba and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Our squadron discovered the missiles in Cuba. We flew a lot of missions in South America, Japan, and out of Alaska along the Soviet borders, and Vietnam, we flew everywhere except Russia, I guess is what you can say. But the CIA program came to an end in 1960 when Francis Gary Powers was shot down in a CIA U-2. They had been shooting at the CIA U-2s. Their program stayed alive for 4 years. And the Russians knew that there was something up there, but they couldn't really get a good solid track on it because of the altitude. The radar wasn't quite that good, but it was getting better.
And what altitude were the U-2's overflights?
Yeah, that would be about 70, 72,000 feet. 74,000 would be about max at the end of the mission when you were lightweight. You would cruise climb, you'd level off probably 68,000 feet when you first kind of stopped climbing. You still flew with full power, but as you burned out gas and got lighter, you'd continue to cruise climb. So at the end of the mission, you'd be about 74,000. And I knew Gary Powers, and he said he had about 72,000 feet. In fact, Gary Powers' son, whom I've known since he was a little kid, this weekend is staying at my townhouse down in Colorado Springs. He was looking for some place to stay for the weekend on a visit, and I said, hell, I'm going to be gone. Why don't you come and stay at my place? So I just talked to him this morning. He's having a good time down at my place, I guess.
The atmosphere is very, very thin at those altitudes. What is unique about flying at that altitude?
Well, the airplane, of course, is very unique. The design of it was very strange. It was built in very, very lightweight material. The aluminum was much thinner than normal Air Force specifications call for. But Kelly Johnson, the Lockheed designer who built it, had to make it light so it would go up to high altitude. And then Pratt & Whitney had to develop an engine that would run at that altitude. There's damn little air up to 70,000 feet. You're almost out of the atmosphere. And so the combination of airframe being extremely light, the big, long, glider-like wings, and an engine that could just barely keep running at those altitudes, they had to put all that together and make it work. And now the aircraft design, the wing and the limitations that any airplane has, ran into a pretty tight box for the maximum altitude. You had about an 8 to 10 knot window between stall and compressibility on the wing. If you hit compressibility, the tail's going to come off the airplane. So you have to stay within that 6 to 10 knot window for hours and hours and hours. We had routine missions run 9 and 10 hours. I flew one that was 13 hours. And you have to stay inside that little narrow window or you're going to lose the airplane. Because if you stalled it at altitude, it wouldn't recover. Again, as soon as it went into a spiral, the tail would come off. The tail was the failure point on the airplane. So it demanded a tremendous amount of attention when you're up there for that period of time. And you've got to do everything manually in that airplane. It was a very basic machine. We had, the only navigation equipment was the radio compass ADF. We didn't have GPSs or anything like that. So you flew visually. We used pilotage, you're looking out the window and you got a map in your hand, and dead reckoning, time and distance. Dead reckoning works pretty good to get you in the ballpark of an area you want to fly to because there's practically no wind up above 60,000 feet. It's cold as hell, but there's no wind. So you can do dead reckoning and come in pretty close to where you want to start looking for targets. But when you get down to precision navigation, it said, okay, I've got a map here and it's got a city, and over here's a bridge. I'm supposed to take a picture of that bridge. That'd be a training exercise. So you got to find the city first, and we got a big drift site in the front, a big scope right in the middle of the windshield, the big rubber cone. So you spend all your time looking in that cone, and it looks out the bottom of the airplane. Because from that altitude, you lose about 100 miles of visibility under the airplane. You can't see anything down there. So this drift sight, we call it, allows you to look right through the airplane and look underneath you. And we had a hand controller that would allow you to move a prism that's down there, so I could look way up ahead, I could look right and left. I could even look back underneath and check my landing gear if I wanted to. It was a 360-degree swivel. So that's basically how you navigated when you got close to where you're supposed to find your target.
Was the U-2 ever enhanced? I thought it was made out of titanium and things like that, rather than just primitive aluminum. Was it ever enhanced with composite materials or titanium?
No, it was always built the same. The titanium was used on the SR because of the heat. But the U-2, our true airspeed up there was 410 knots or something like that, as I recall. So it's a subsonic airplane. Now, our indicated airspeed, we're sitting up there with Cessna airspeeds, 90 knots, 100 knots, something like that. That's what we were reading at that altitude. And that's why that window we had to stay in becomes very critical, because you're approaching the limits on both ends of the spectrum of the airplane.
Did they ever have any accidents because of pilot error on the window?
Well, we lost an awful lot of airplanes. They built 55 U-2s total out of the factory. Some of them went to the CIA, the first group, and the Air Force got 35 airplanes. And then when the CIA finally folded up after Gary Power's shoot down, those airplanes went back into various inventories. But in 1968, I guess it was, out of the 50 airplanes, there were only 7 left. All the rest had crashed or been shot down. So they went back to Lockheed and Kelly Johnson and said, this is a hell of an airplane, but we're running out of them. Can you build us some more? And he said, I'll build you some, and I'm going to build you a much better one. It's going to be bigger. It won't go any higher because that wing is as good as a subsonic wing is going to be to carry the amount of weight that you want to carry up there. But it'll be bigger so we can carry a lot more equipment. Instead of 1 or 2 cameras, we'll have cameras all over that airplane, and we'll have antennas sticking out of it, and there'll be electronic intelligence, and we're going to put a lot more gas in it. We could fly for about 10 hours in a normal load of gas in the A model that I flew. When Kelly built the replacement airplane, he built 39 of them, I think. That thing had 16 hours worth of gas, and the engine was better, so instead of 3,000 miles, which was our normal range, 3,500, it would go about 8,000 miles on one load of gas. So the airplane was a much better machine. Of course, they had GPS and all sorts of good stuff that we never saw. But we simply ran out of airplanes. We had to go get some more.
Do we have any U-2s operational today?
Yeah, there's 32 airplanes left. They're based at Beale Air Force Base in California. They have one detachment in South Korea. It's been there for about 25 years. That opened up that detachment when the Vietnam War ended, because they were stationed down there. They moved up to Korea, so they've been flying over and around North Korea for 25 years. And then they've got detachments in, well, they got them over in the desert, for the desert war that's going on now, Afghanistan. I don't know which base they're actually operating from, but they've been over in that part of the world ever since the first pick our pilots. So they came to our organization and they picked 8 of us out of the U-2 program. And I was the senior, most experienced guy at that time. And they went to the B-58 Hustler supersonic bomber program. And they picked about 6 crew from there. So we all got together and went up to Beale Air Force Base in California, started attending ground school, and then in January of '66, the first airplane arrived. And I can still remember seeing that airplane coming to Patton, because none of us had ever seen the airplane. We'd just seen a couple of pictures, but obviously that, if you've seen the airplane, you know the picture doesn't do it justice. It's the most out-of-the-world spacecraft you ever thought you'd see. So when we saw that first airplane land, we knew we were into something very special. And Kelly Johnson said, okay, the key now is we got to be survivable. You two, we can't do things. And the intent was that the SR would be overflying the Soviet Union, just continue that program. But of course, Eisenhower had guaranteed Khrushchev that we wouldn't do that anymore after powers went down. So now they had this brand new airplane, and it had capabilities that we really couldn't use for its initial purpose of design. But there's hundreds of other places we could fly it, so they went ahead and kept it. And they built, let's see, 32 SR-71s. 2 of them were 2-seat pilot trainers at a second cockpit. And the others were the operational airplanes. Now, the operational airplanes had a second cockpit too, but we had a navigator in the back seat. And he ran all of the systems on the airplanes, the cameras, the nav system, the communication. So that left us in the front seat just to fly the airplane. That's all we had to do is get that thing up and down. And it was a handful to fly because you had to be so precise with what you were doing at those speeds. Because Kelly said, if I'm going to go higher than the U-2, which is, like I say, 72,000 feet nominally, I'm going to design an airplane that will go to 85,000 feet. But to get there, I got to go supersonic. We can't build a subsonic airplane. We can't have a wing design that will go much higher than the U-2 and still do an incredible job. So he said, I'll build it supersonic, and the numbers came out that if I can get the airplane going 3 times the speed of sound, Mach 3, 3.2, it'll go up to 85,000 feet and a little higher. So that was his target in designing the airplane, was that speed, and with the resulting speed, you'll get that altitude and carry what you want. So it was obviously a very, very dramatic breakthrough in aircraft design, and it's the highest, fastest flying airplane ever built anywhere in the world. It still is. Even though they're all in museums now, there's never been an airplane built that would outperform.
And once they got airborne, the time from San Francisco to New York was how long?
About 1 hour.
1 hour.
Yeah. And
but as I recall the story, what they had to do with them, they actually had to take off and then refuel. Is that correct?
yeah, we took off lightweight. We discovered if you took off with a full load of fuel, there were 2 reasons against doing that. One is if you lost an engine after takeoff, you're going to lose the airplane. And so until you got a little higher speed, you know, maybe about 350 or 400 knots, then it would handle 1 engine okay. You had enough thrust to fly on 1 engine, but you didn't have controllability because the engines are outboard. And if you took off on 1 engine with the full afterburner, the airplane would just roll over and crash. So you had to wait at a speed until you had full control inputs that would work. So that was one reason we took off lightweight. And the other one was we decided that we had a whole squadron of in-flight refueling tankers at our disposal. They were based, they were part of our unit. So we said, why don't we just put a tanker downstream 50 miles or 100 miles, just have them sitting there in orbit. And so after takeoff, we have a nice safe takeoff. We'll just cruise down there, subsonic, with a full load of gas. Now I'm at 30,000 feet with a full load of gas. If I took off with a full load of gas, I'm going to burn a hell of a lot of gas getting to that same point. So for two reasons it made sense to take off lightweight, that's for safety, and put a tanker down there, that's for performance, put it down. And it was an easy airplane to refuel. I'd refueled airplanes all my life, and in-flight refueling on that machine was really, I thought it was pretty simple. You had so much power, and you had huge flight control surfaces. So you could slide up behind that tanker, and you could fill up all your tanks in about 12 minutes, and then punch off the tanker and light the afterburner and go up to 80,000 feet and do your business.
Well, now, what was the life duration of the SR-71?
Well, now on a mission, every hour and a half you had to refuel.
No, but I mean, when did they start? When were they?
Oh yeah, well we got the first airplane in '66 at Beale Air Force Base, and they flew the last operational mission in 1990, and then the Air Force closed the program.
But didn't they reactivate it for Desert Storm?
Yeah, well, they reactivated it under pressure of Congress. When the Air Force decided to shut it down, Congress said, well, we don't think that's very smart, but the Air Force wanted to save money and spend it on something else. So they said, okay, you can shut it down, but keep 3 airplanes in storage at Palmdale. Let Lockheed maintain them, and, once a month to bring them out, crank them up, put them back in. We want to have 3 airplanes as an option. So in 1995, they directed the Air Force to reactivate those 3 airplanes. And so they went back out and got a hold of some of the pilots that were off doing other things. And of course, they were delighted to come back and get back in the airplane. But they flew it for about 2 years out of Edwards Air Force Base. And all they did was test work and exercises. The Air Force would never task it. The Air Force wanted the airplane to go away. And they said, if we start tasking it again, people are going to say, what the hell of an airplane, let's keep it going. So for the 2.5 years that it was reactivated, the Air Force never gave it a single mission to fly, even though there were customers out there that were really begging to get the airplane to go do things.
The reason it became unnecessary was based on the development of satellite programs, is that correct?
Well, that was the excuse the Air Force used. Satellites are magnificent, but they've got an awful lot of limitations that the flexibility of the SR would cover things that satellites can't. You've already got a satellite up there on a mission. That's why it's up there. Now, if you want to go over and look at something in Iran, and that's not what the satellite is flying, you can move the orbit, but you're going to be using some expendable fuel. And you're also leaving the orbit that it was already in doing a mission. So there's limited flexibility. Now they have great sensors on board. There's no question of that. If they're in the right spot, they can see everything that we could. But with the airplane, you can go anywhere, anytime, and at Mach 3, they're not going to touch it. We never worried about any missiles or any defensive systems of any kind, even though they fired over 1,000 SA-2 missiles at the airplane in the 25 years we flew it. The SR was never touched, and we just, we never gave it a second thought. We had sensors on board that told us when they were tracking us and when they were firing, but you could look in a little rear view periscope we had in the front seat. You could look back over the airplane, and you'd see a contrail or an explosion of a missile back there somewhere 30 miles behind you. So that was never really an issue. We had really good defensive systems. Besides just the fact that speed and altitude were defensive all by itself.
So you went in the Air Force in 1948?
49.
49?
Yeah.
Retired in?
83.
83. How many hours do you have in your logbook?
Well, I was very fortunate in that I got to, even after I left operational flying, because there's a point in time when they take you out of there and you become a squadron commander or wing commander or staff job. I always had a staff job that's what they call it was rated, meaning that they want an active duty pilot in that particular job, even as a commander. So I was able to continue flying I was in the Air Force for 34 years, and I was able to fly for just over 30 years. Now that's unheard of in today's Air Force. The young guys that are going through pilot training now, if they fly for 10, 12 years, from that point on they're going to be doing desk jobs or flying drones or something like that. So I was fortunate in that respect that I was able to keep my hand in the cockpit. And my very last assignment in the Pentagon was the only time in my career that I was not in a rated slot. So I wound up with a little over 8,000 hours of military time, almost all of it either in fighters or the U-2 and the SR-71. So I had a lot of good high performance time in my logbook.
Well, listen, let's open it up for some questions. I know we're going to be starting up here in a little bit at 2 o'clock with our Vietnam guys, but any questions from the audience to come out? Yes, sir.
Was the SR-71 and the U-2, or the U-2, were they based at Atsugi, Japan?
The U-2 was based at Atsugi. That was the CIA project. That wasn't the Air Force. Yeah, at Atsugi, the CIA guys flew out of there, and they did flights over China. CIA guys had some really cool missions. You know, we were all jealous that they were getting all the, of course they got paid for it, but they flew a lot of tremendously dangerous missions. They were flying over everybody's badland. And the Air Force, you know, they wouldn't let us do some of that stuff because if it's an active duty Air Force guy, that's an act of war. If you overfly China and things like that, you can get national deep trouble for doing that. So they had all the really, you know, we had a lot of interesting missions, but theirs were really, really interesting. Yeah, Atsugi was their base.
Any missions that you could mention? Well, first of all, are there any missions that you had that are still classified?
No, I don't think so. Almost all that stuff. Now the U-2s are still flying. They're 60-some years old since the program started. Of course, there's a whole new fleet of airplanes involved, but the concept of the U-2 and the design, it's still running. They're getting ready to try and shut it down because they want to go to the unmanned drones. But the U-2s, because it's a low-stress airplane, you don't put any Gs on the airplane. It's not one of these yank and bank missions, you know. You fly it very, very carefully. So there's no stress on the airplane. It's not going to wear out. You can fly that airplane for another 50 years if you wanted to. But and some of the cost-cutting exercises going on now, the U-2 and the A-10 are the two operational airplanes that they want to completely cut off, even though it'll be a year or two before that actually happens, but the process is starting to take place now. It'd be a shame to get rid of the U-2. It's a very inexpensive, very reliable, and it's got capabilities that I never dreamed of when I was flying it. And it's because of the sensors that are being developed. You know, you can sit at 72,000 feet and you can copy electronic intelligence 350, 400 miles away. You don't have to overfly everything. You do if you want to take pictures, but they do a lot of other stuff besides taking pictures. So I guess that may be, U-2 is probably going to disappear, I suspect.
Well, and the drones, also called RPAs in the military, they have a maximum altitude of what, 30,000? No,
they're higher than that, but there's a whole variety of different drones. Now, the Predator, the one you read about mostly, that's over in Afghanistan, it says, initially those were just recon, and then they decided, hey, we can hang some weapons on the wings, and so it became an active weapon delivery airplane. But the Global Hawk is a huge, huge drone, and that's the one that's designed to replace the U-2. In fact,
it's a jet power.
Yeah, that's jet power. The Predator is propeller. That's jet power. And then we go to about 60,000 feet. But, you know, U-2 goes to over 70. But the thing about the drones, they can stay there for 24 hours. And if it does go down, you're not going to lose the pilot. So those are the things that they keep throwing out, saying, oh. But if you're going to be at 60,000 feet, you're vulnerable as hell. You can be shot down in a heartbeat because it's a slow flying airplane that's subsonic and it's just poking along up there. People get lulled into the fact that over in Iraq and Afghanistan we don't have any defensive systems against us. You can fly anything over, fly a Piper Cub if you want to. Nobody's going to shoot you down. So they say, look how safe this drone is. Well, once in a while we lose one, but it's because the pilot lost track of it. But you can't fly those drones in areas where they have a strong defense. They won't survive. But people are so enhanced with the drone business, and they're fine for an awful lot of things, but you got to be careful where you send them if you want to get it back.
Yes, sir.
What do you think the Air Force would do for pilot seats, run on the pilot seats?
Well, they're taking a lot of pilots and sending them to run the damn drone programs. In fact, Air Force Academy cadets, I live in Colorado Springs where the academy is, they've got guys that sign up for pilot training, get selected. See, all the cadets don't go to pilot training. There's maybe a couple hundred every year that go to pilot training out of 1,000 graduates. And some of them are given a very short course in flying airplanes and into drones. And they say, I didn't sign up for that. I want to go fly F-15s or the F-22. And so they're sending brand new lieutenants right out of the academy into drones. And you've got a bunch of disgruntled guys. And the whole Air Force has been drawn down. This sequester operation is going on. We're about to have the smallest Air Force we've had since before World War II. Our capabilities, and not just the Air Force, the Army and the Navy, they're shutting down programs left and right. Yeah, it's a tragedy. Because you can't rebuild that kind of a system. We learned that after World War II. You just can't rebuild a force that quick. You've lost your people, you've lost the technology. So it's a sad thing to see what's happening.
Is the public aware of that?
Pardon?
Is the public aware of it?
No, I don't think, it's out there for the public to read it, but no, I don't think the public is really aware that.
With so people involved in the military anymore, so many people don't know or don't even care. And if Kurt Brown would have been able to get out of his plane and join us, the thing that he would have said, of course, he came from the Air Force into an astronaut. I think he had 5 shuttle missions. And I'll end the story with this. My son's actually in the Air Force, flew F-15s, and just left command of the drone squadron. And so he's ACDC, maybe you would call it, but he's certainly supporting of the RPA program. But one of the reasons that he went into the Air Force is he wanted to be an astronaut. The goal of flight, the goal of being an astronaut has been taken away for whatever reason. And whether it's going to Mars or whatever, I will promise you this, none of us would ever have these if it hadn't been for the space program. And the whole technology demand for aviation and space things. So anyway,
I sense something when I speak to Academy cadets, which I see a lot of them all the time. One thing that bugs me is, I say, are you going to pilot training? Oh yeah. What, do you want to go to fighters? Oh no, I want to go to multi-engine so I can get with the airlines. They'll come right out and tell you, I'm not in the Air Force to defend our country, I want to go to the airlines. I said, well, I spent 34 years in the Air Force and I was just getting the hang of it when they said, time's up. So I had to leave.
yes sir, one more.
I was watching these documentaries, and they said on the SR-71, the interval between the stall speed and the maximum speed was very small. Did that change with the altitude? And what was the rate for the interval?
No, that wasn't the SR, that was the U-2. The SR had no limits like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was the U-2 that had about a 10-knot window. And you had to fly the whole mission inside those 10 knots. 72,000.
Oh, and then it got bigger when you went,
No, it's just, it kept getting smaller and smaller. The higher you went, the tighter it got.
okay.
There wasn't any issue climbing up till you got to about 60,000, then there was a little bit of a convergence, but you were still, had a big window. But the higher you got, the tighter that window got. So at our max altitude, it'd be about 10 knots.
What happened on the SR-71 then? If you went too high, you brought into space or?
He designed it for 85,000 feet, and it's gone up to a little over 90,000 above the max. You reach a equivalent airspeed limit that Kelly Johnson has put on the stability augmentation system. It's a system that where computers are taking over the inputs that you make and making them come out right in the flight control systems. And even though it's a triple redundant system, he said 310 knots indicated at 80,000 feet or 85,000 feet is about as slow as I ever want you to get. And if you're going to go any higher, you're going to go slower, of course, as you continue to climb. So he said that kind of automatically puts, you got different limits you got to watch, and one of them is that indicated airspeed, and one is the temperature on the engine. Both of those limit how fast you can go.
Well, listen, we've got to stop here. We've got a program starting here at 2 o'clock, which we already passed, on Vietnam. We got some great speakers on this, so stand by. And General Halloran is on the far aisle in the big tent. So if you have other questions, stop by and visit with him. Thank you so much for attending.